In the early 14th century, amidst the quiet countryside of Yorkshire, a child was born into a moderately wealthy family in the village of Hipswell. His name was John Wycliffe, and he would go on to shake the very foundations of the Catholic Church. It was around 1320 when Wycliffe entered the world, in a time of great political and religious turbulence in Britain. In 1345, Wycliffe began his studies at Oxford University, immersing himself in the disciplines of theology, philosophy, and law. His sharp mind set him on a path toward theological questioning. By 1351, Wycliffe had earned his Bachelor of Arts degree, marking the beginning of his illustrious academic career. 5 years later, in 1356, Wycliffe penned his first known work, The Last Age of the Church. In this bold text, he openly voiced his concerns about the growing corruption within the Church. In 1361, Wycliffe was appointed Master of Balliol College at Oxford, a role that placed him in a significant position of leadership. In 1362, he was ordained as a priest, formally joining the clergy. 3 years later, in 1365, Wycliffe became the rector of Fillingham in Lincolnshire. This appointment provided him with both a stable income and the space to continue his theological studies. By 1372, Wycliffe had earned his Doctor of Theology. 2 years later, in 1374, he was appointed rector of Lutterworth in Leicestershire, a position he would hold for the remainder of his life. That same year, Wycliffe's views were further shaped when he was sent to Bruges to negotiate with the papacy. This diplomatic mission deepened his skepticism of the Church's authority and wealth. By 1375, he began to preach openly against the lavish lifestyles and corruption of Church leaders. In 1376, Wycliffe published On Civil Dominion, a radical work in which he argued that secular rulers should seize the Church's wealth, a dangerous position, one that soon drew the ire of the papacy. In 1377, Pope Gregory XI issued 5 papal bulls condemning Wycliffe's teachings, marking the beginning of a formal conflict between Wycliffe and the Church. The stakes were high, but thanks to his powerful protectors, Wycliffe escaped punishment following his first trial at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. By 1378, the Western Schism tore the Catholic Church in two, reinforcing Wycliffe's belief that reform was desperately needed. His criticisms grew louder, and in 1379, he published On the Truth of Sacred Scripture, where he argued that the Bible, not the Church, was the ultimate authority. In 1380, Wycliffe began his most ambitious project, the translation of the Bible into English. This work was a direct challenge to the Catholic Church's control over Scripture. But 1381 was also a year of turmoil. The peasants' revolt erupted across England, and while some rebels invoked Wycliffe's ideas of social justice, he did not condone the violence. By 1382, Wycliffe had lost his position at Oxford under intense pressure from the Church. He retreated to Lutterworth, but not to obscurity. It was here that his followers, known as the Lollards, completed the English translation of the New Testament, making Wycliffe's dream a reality. The Lollards, inspired by Wycliffe's teachings, began spreading his ideas far and wide, advocating for reform based on biblical authority. By 1383, the translation of the Old Testament had been completed, a project that Wycliffe had championed. But by late 1384, Wycliffe's health had deteriorated. He suffered a debilitating stroke yet continued his theological work as best he could. On December 28, 1384, John Wycliffe passed away in Lutterworth, leaving behind a legacy of reform. In the years that followed, Wycliffe's followers were persecuted. In 1401, laws were passed allowing heretics to be burned at the stake. By 1408, the constitutions of Oxford banned Wycliffe's writings in an attempt to suppress his ideas. Yet, even in the face of persecution, the Lollard movement continued to grow in secret. Wycliffe's influence soon reached Bohemia, where the reformer Jan Hus adopted many of his ideas. In 1415, at the Council of Constance, which also condemned Jan Hus, Wycliffe was posthumously declared a heretic. 13 years later, in 1428, Pope Martin V ordered that Wycliffe's remains be exhumed and burned, his ashes scattered in the river Swift. And in 1517, Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation echoed many of Wycliffe's arguments, particularly concerning church corruption and the authority of the Bible. Wycliffe's work laid the foundation for future reformers. By 1526, William Tyndale had completed a new translation of the New Testament into English, continuing the path that Wycliffe had begun. In 1534, when Henry VIII broke from the Roman Catholic Church, the ideas of reformers like Wycliffe gained newfound legitimacy. Wycliffe's influence could even be seen in the English Book of Common Prayer, published in 1547 under Edward VI. But persecution followed. Queen Mary I's reign, beginning in 1553, saw renewed efforts to root out Wycliffe's followers. In the 1600s, Wycliffe's writings were rediscovered and republished by Protestant reformers, ensconcing his legacy as a key precursor to the Reformation. In 1881, centuries after Wycliffe's death, the Wycliffe Bible Society was founded, named in honor of his pioneering efforts to make the scriptures accessible to all. John Wycliffe, the morning star of the Reformation, a man whose ideas outlasted his lifetime, would become a symbol of religious freedom, his work inspiring reformers for generations to come.